welcome to AMA Ask Media Anything. I am Patricio Salinas. Thanks for joining us for this conversation between our local media professionals and you, our audience. The 2018 Poynter Media Trust Survey indicates that local media outlets are trusted by a majority of Americans, even as trust in national outlets has declined. It's easy to understand why Acadiana has trust in our local media. In addition to providing us with important information about our area, they are active participants in our community. So who better to answer our questions about the media than our local experts? Here tonight to share their insights and answer some of your questions about the sometime elusive media industry, we have Ian Auzenne, Executive News Producer at KATC TV3, and Letitia Walker, News Director at KATC TV3. Ian Auzenne is a longtime broadcaster from Lafayette, Louisiana, who holds a degree in politics from Princeton University. Shortly after earning his degree, Ian worked as a producer and reporter at KLFY, before moving to KATC as an assignments editor and morning show producer. He's now the executive news and special events producer at KATC TV3. Ian also works as a radio personality, disc jockey, and play-by-play sports announcer for several local radio stations. As if that weren't enough, he also produces and hosts his own show, 124 East Main, right here on AOC. Letitia Walker grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. She has worked for many television stations across Louisiana, including WBRC and KLFY. She now calls Lafayette her home and has been the news director at KATC TV3 for over 11 years. For tonight's program, it's about facilitating conversation between media producers and media audiences. If you have a question for our guests during this live program, you can use the hashtag AOC Free Speech Week, or hashtag AMAEN, or hashtag AMA Letitia to ask on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can also call us at 337-366-8951. Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you for being here, Letitia and Ian. So let's get to our first question that we got from our social media page. It says, why has media never offered a voice for the families and members of mental health, a voice in the community, unlike all of the other physical disabilities, when Louisiana is the worst in the state and the worst country in the world to address 25% of the world population that has mental health as a physical health issue?
I don't know that we've not given them a voice. I think we have. The trouble with it is that we have so much to cover. We have to balance day of events. We have to balance what's going on in the world of politics, what's going on nationally, what's going on across the world, as well as here in our community. And the fact of the matter is we don't have the time or the personnel maybe to get to all of the topics we'd like to. We do cover mental health as well as other disabilities or other health-related stories, but maybe not to the frequency some people would like. So I wouldn't say that we don't cover it. Maybe we don't do it to the frequency that some people would want. But again, that comes down to there are only a certain number of hours in the day. There are only a certain number of people that can cover these stories. And in some cases where we try to cover a story dealing with health, the people that are most affected by it don't want to speak. It's one thing to hear from a medical professional, but if we don't have anyone who is suffering from a disease or from a condition, if someone suffering from a disease or condition doesn't want to speak, then we're out of luck. We've lost the bulk of the story there. So it comes down to finding the people, getting the people to speak, but also having the time and the personnel to do it.
Okay, because I know this past June, the Anthony Bourdain's suicide, that seemed to have opened up the doors in terms of having the discussion about mental health, specifically from media professionals. I know through certain research, there were certain reporters, television reporters, that basically came out saying they were suffering from depression.
Right.
So I was wondering if y'all had any perspective on that in terms of how, like, a death of a major celebrity, a celebrity that was very well liked, opened up this conversation.
Yeah, and we've covered stories in relation to that. We've had a reporter do a several-part series on the depression that she was feeling and undergoing in treatment, and so we're not afraid to put ourselves in there if it's appropriate, but especially in cases dealing with celebrity, we do tend to cover those more and tried to look at prevention or after effects from these types of situations. Typically, we don't cover suicides, but in a case like that, we thought it was important to highlight it and talk about it so it doesn't go ignored. And I do think we need to do a better job covering mental health. I think we need to do more of it because it's just an important topic right now, and you have to react based on what your public needs and wants, and they want more.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, the second question we have here is, with several different media outlets on a nationwide level being the target of violence, such as the Baltimore Sun earlier this year, do you ever fear for your safety?
We fear for our safety, but we don't let fear stop us from doing our jobs. I think it's important to be cautious when you're out in the field and know the effects something may have on you later, but you can't let it stop you from doing your job.
And that's the thing. It's when you go to work every day, and especially seeing the Baltimore Sun incident. Just yesterday, the Fox O&O in Washington, D.C., a man barged in, was shot because he broke into the building. He had had a history with the station. He had sent them emails, had made phone calls. They knew who it was before police identified him. When you see stories like that, it makes you wonder, when is that going to happen to me? Will it happen to me? You go in and you always have that in the back of your mind. You hope it doesn't happen. You don't think it'll happen, but you have to understand that it's part of the danger of the world we live in now. You always used to think violence against journalists is something that would happen in the Middle East or in a dictatorship, but in the kind of cultural climate we live in now, and with the media getting thrown under the bus for practically everything, and all forms of media being lumped into one as opposed to national versus local and so on and so forth, you always have to have that fear in the back of your mind. Letitia's right. It doesn't stop us from what we do, but we are cognizant of that danger.
Okay, so I know that question dealt with violence, but another question that's more or less related to it is safety, and I bring that up because reporters and photographers always deal with hurricanes. And every time there's a big hurricane, the reporter and the photographer are doing live shots, even though the conditions are really bad. Any thoughts in terms of, specifically coming from news management, what's y'all's perspective about what's too much? Like, what crosses the line in terms of safety, specifically when you're dealing with a hurricane?
We have a policy: we don't go out in the height of the storm. When the storm is going at full strength, everybody's inside. We don't go to the locations where it's going to hit directly. Safety is number one for our company, and they refuse to even station people out there when they know something is coming. They'd rather protect the employees and get everybody out and heed the guidance. So you won't see us in the height of the storm. If you see wind shots, we're probably just in the backyard. And we'll say that. We're right in the backyard. We're waiting to go out. We're very clear of where we are, but we don't put people out.
Okay. All right. So for Ian, this is a question for you. Do you fear for your safety having to occasionally work from the Cajun Field press box? Should OHSA be contracted?
No, sometimes I wonder when I'm in the elevator, but that's a whole other story. No, then whoever sent that question is, I don't know who it is, but hello. No, Cajun Field, it's an older facility, but no, the press box is fine. Again, if the elevator gets stuck, there's a good chance I might be in it, though.
Okay. All right. So who amongst you determines what content is presented on the news?
That's a combination of the both of us, but also the entire newsroom. There are two meetings during the day, one at 10:30, well before I show up for work, because I work 2 to 11, and then one at 2 o'clock for the evening producers, reporters, and anchors, where we'll discuss what's in the 5 and 6 o'clock, what should lead, what shouldn't lead, what should be in the show, what shouldn't, and then we'll discuss what stories the reporters for Nightside will do. After that, it's up to the individual producers, along with Letitia and me, to help guide them and help direct what's going to be in the show, how a story is written. The anchors will also jump in. The anchors have to read the stories in their own tone. It has to be conversational for them. So they'll go in, for example, I have stories written for the 10 o'clock right now. By the time I get back, Jim Hummel and Marcel Fontenot will have probably condensed those scripts down to 9 to 10 seconds. They don't like to speak as much as I write for them. So they'll shorten the scripts, then they'll present it on the air. For my 10 o'clock show, I have, by the time 6:30, 7 o'clock rolls around, I've got it laid out. If breaking news comes in, I'll put it in. But long story short, it's everybody has a hand in it, but individually the producers make the ultimate decision of what goes where, what runs, and then the anchors will tighten up the scripts.
And what's great about that is that it's a lot of different perspectives. It's a lot of different people, diverse people that are contributing. And they're saying, hey, this story is big. We need more on this. And so that conversation is there. It's not a dictatorship. We absolutely run as a team. And I've more than once said, okay, you know what? You're right. I'm wrong. And I'm okay with that. I want what's best for the public. And sometimes we need to hash it out on what belongs in the show and what doesn't, what isn't newsworthy.
And to build off of what she said, I think part of the question here is, one question I get all the time is, does network dictate, or does insert other entity here dictate? Absolutely not. Everything is done on the local level. Sure, we'll pull stories or video from the ABC server or from the CNN server or from the Associated Press wire. We will take content from them, but no one ever says you have to run this. Maybe Letitia will have a story that she wants. Case in point, the Vermilion dog rescue story, which I hated from the get-go, but she was adamant about it. And she was right. The story was one of the most clicked and most viewed stories we've had this year because it's something our viewers like. It wasn't exactly the hard news I would have liked for my 10 o'clock, but it's what people wanted and what people love. And we do have to give that to the viewers. But CNN doesn't tell us what to run. ABC doesn't tell us what to run. Nobody tells us what content goes in our newscast except for what we decide should be in it.
Okay, thank you. Another question that we have here is, what advice would you give me if someone listening wanted to become an executive editor / producer?
Be ready to work from the ground up. Be ready to be humbled. When I got out of college, I thought I knew everything. I thought I was an expert. I got humbled quickly, especially after working for Letitia. I made a lot of missteps, and quite frankly, I'm surprised she hasn't fired me yet. But you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to admit you're wrong. You have to be willing to admit that what you think is best or what you think you know is best isn't always the case. Be willing to learn from people around you. And I've been fortunate, having worked at KLFY and KATC, to learn from some of the best. Chuck Huebner, Darla Montgomery, Blue Rolfus at KATC, Hoyt Harris, Jim Hummel, Marcel Fontenot, Letitia, who is almost like an older sister. I know I annoy her a lot with some of the things I do, but I've learned a lot from her in the 6-7 years I've been at KATC. You've got to learn from the people around you. And even here in my experiences at AOC, in the 20 years I've been running around the old building and this one, from the people who walk in off the street or those who've been editing or been producing shows, you pick things up from them. They're not conventional, but they work. And sometimes some of those unconventional details you pick up from volunteers at a public access station do work in a formal news setting.
Okay. All right. So we have another one here. The question is, are you free to determine the contents of what you or your colleagues write and deliver, or do you have to censor yourself or forced to run anything?
No, we don't have to run anything.
Okay. How important is fact-checking your reporters? Does anybody fact-check for them, or do they do it themselves?
We fact-check for everybody. Usually for a day of turn, I'll edit a package. Jim Marcel, our anchors, will edit a package. Letitia sometimes will jump in. So you have 2-3 different sets of eyes looking at a story before it ever makes it to air. There are some cases where we'll look at something and say, no, this isn't running, because there may be a detail missing, because someone who needed to be interviewed for that story wasn't interviewed, and we don't have a perspective that should be in that story. So before anything hits air, it is vetted, it's fact-checked. We make sure that every possible detail we could have is in that story before it ever hits the air.
We'll ask many questions while we're reading it, and if they can't answer them, the story doesn't run. Or I'll say, get me the answers to these questions, then let's reread them. But we're not forced to run anything just because we shot it, and we do kill stories.
Does it ever get to a point where, like, for lack of experience on the new reporter, that maybe the script is a little bit one-sided, and you need a certain balance? Does that ever
It's happened.
surface?
It's absolutely happened, but then it doesn't run.
Then it doesn't run, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We'll send them out to go get the interview, or if the day is over, we'll send them the next day to finish it. They're going to do it right. I'm not going to put half of a story on.
Sure. Okay, great. The KATC Facebook page has great posts, but there are there's some trolls,
Just a few.
some Facebook trolls. So how do you manage or monitor the comments, even hateful ones, on your social media pages?
You take this one, Letitia.
We do expect and hope that our viewers will report to Facebook when they see a comment that they believe is offensive or shouldn't be on it. But protecting the First Amendment, we only ban users for hate speech and threats. Everything else, the sarcasm, the rudeness, the somewhat questionable comments, we don't censor. It has to be hate speech or a threat. That's our threshold. And if it doesn't meet that threshold, they can say it.
The only bad part about Facebook is that we don't have enough eyes to go through and see everything. I wish we did. I wish we had 5 people we could hire, sit them in a room and say, monitor Facebook for comments, for hate speech, for threats, but we can't. So unfortunately, sometimes things do fall through the cracks. Usually, if I have to step in to delete a comment, I'm going to ban someone too, because usually that's when if I've got to step in and mark a comment, for me, I've got to ban that person too. If you can't handle the responsibility of social media, you shouldn't be there. We have trolls. We have people who will send us messages or critique reporters, especially grammar. And if you try it, don't question grammar without knowing that you're right. And we'll sometimes maybe have a little fun with people in that respect. But for deleting comments, it's got to be, again, threat. It has to be hate speech. It has to be something that does not meet the threshold of the First Amendment.
Sure. Um, we're like we're past the interesting stage or phase, because the Facebook or social media it's not going anywhere. It's staying here. But I still remember, like 15 years ago, it was just television, radio, cable news. But it seems now social media is really driving the news content, and you're receiving your news now through the news feed. So I'm just interested to see what perspective you all have in terms of how has social media, particularly Facebook, influenced your station.
I love it and I hate it. Obviously, we make money from TV, and if everyone is looking at the news feed and not the TV, I'm not making the advertising dollars. But I think there will be a time when we can monetize the digital content equally to what we do on TV. So I don't like it in that respect, but every other respect, I love Facebook. I love social media. I love talking to the viewers. I have a direct conversation with viewers every day that I didn't have before. I have sources that I didn't have, pictures, videos that I would never have gotten if I had to go out in the field and get it. I mean, instantly we know when things happen. When the grand shooting happened, we knew instantly because our wall was flooded and people were communicating with us, and we communicate back. It is everyone's job in the newsroom to answer messages, like post, thank people for posts. I believe in being courteous. If you're going to talk to me, I want to talk back to you. The comments, no, we don't get to get inside the comments. But if you message me, if you post on my wall, I'm going to respond to you. I'm going to figure out what the fire truck is doing on Johnston Street, because I feel it's a customer service. I like the interaction that we've never had before. It's so invaluable.
Is there more interaction going on Facebook than Twitter?
Yes.
Yes.
In this
Okay.
market, yes.
Okay.
Other markets are different. Bigger
Different.
markets, Twitter is more of a player, but here it's Facebook.
Facebook. Okay. All right. Let's see. What's your personal toughest story?
The grand shooting probably was, even though I wasn't in the field. My brother worked at the Grand Theater on Kali Saloon when the shooting happened, and we heard Grand Theater shooting. We weren't sure which one it was. As soon as my little brother got in touch with us, said, look, it's the other theater. I'm okay. They're sending us home. It was a bit of relief. But after that relief came, it left just as quickly, because you've got people in another movie theater. You don't know how many people are alive. You don't know how many people are dead. You don't know if the gunman is still at large. And then 26, 27 hours later, when the shift finally ends, you still have more questions than answers. Why did this person come to Lafayette to do it? What's going through the minds of the people who are in the theater? What these families, you don't even want to think of what they're going through. And that sits on your mind, that weighs on your mind throughout the intervening days and weeks and even months. After a while, it finally went away, and you finally got back to a sense of normality. But still that June day, and what was it, 2015, that though that 3 day period, the Thursday through the Saturday, is still very clear and very vivid in my mind.
Yeah, I finally passed out after 36 plus hours awake and at the station. I had to force myself to go home. But I think more impactful for me was Mickey Shunek. I really took that to heart. And after work, I found myself looking for her. I really, it connected with me emotionally. And I just wanted to do anything in my power to find her. It was really impactful.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. How do you avoid editorializing?
The filter. You have to have an internal filter when you are writing a story, when you are on the air. I know in my case, especially doing sports talk, I may have some opinions that aren't kosher for air, or I may have information that I know that I can't use on the air. I've got to censor myself. In the news cycle, I may believe one thing, I may think something is one way when it may not be, but I have to report the facts. I cannot put opinion in. I have to report what we know. We have an obligation. We have a bias, dare I say, towards the truth. We have to give people the best available version of the truth that we have at any given time. And by rule, by dictate, we cannot editorialize. We cannot put opinion. We have to give it as straight as possible. So you have to have a built-in filter. For those that don't, you have editors, you have producers, you have a news director to do that. And Letitia will be the first to tell you, some of the conversations you'll hear in a newsroom is like, please, why? Just not say it. We have to make sure that doesn't get on the air.
But do you ever feel, these reporters are young, right? This is typically their first job. As they mature and they become a real journalist, sometimes you start seeing their bias, and you may not see it in this market, but you definitely see it in a bigger market. So, like, what advice would you give a young reporter that's wants to do this, wants to be a journalist for at least 15 years, which is a lifetime in this industry, not to really be biased, but to try to be objective? The reason I say that is because on the national scene, it's become very argumentative. When you have CNN and then you have Fox, is they're trying to prove a point, and since they're mostly talking heads, people that are not media savvy take that as face value, and they think it's a news report, but it's really just an argumentative piece. So what perspective would you give like this new reporter in terms of grounding them to keep just the facts?
Best I can say is keep the faith. I know it's trite, but you're in this business for a reason. You're here to report. You're here to tell people what is happening and give them the information. If you keep that in mind throughout your entire career, you'll be good. But the other part I think that helps me is be grounded. Find someone that'll help you check your bias, someone who will question your beliefs. And if you get the chance, even if it's for 2 years, 3 years, no matter how brief, leave your comfort zone. Leave your hometown. Go somewhere that you've never been. You'll learn other people's perspectives. You'll learn what other people think and how they see the world. And by doing that, it'll make you question your own biases and maybe change the way you think. You have to be able to see the world from another person's perspective. The best way to do that is to leave everything you've ever known, go somewhere unfamiliar, and live there for a year, 2 years, or another extended amount of time.
You need to understand what your bias is too. As a daughter of a police officer, I know I may have a certain bias. And so if I'm going to do a police officer related story, I'll get somebody else to look at it and tell them, I want to make sure this is both sides, fair, balanced, and everything, and they will. So I'm not afraid to do that. If I know a reporter has a bias or a tendency to like certain things, I'll say, I want this person to read it, who I know has an opposite, and I really just try to balance them out.
Okay, great answers. Thank you. Okay, so another question that we have here is, how do consumers know to trust you as news sources become fake news? How do you make watchers and listeners trust you?
I hope just by proving that we're fair, by showing them. I like to, when we're doing reports, tell them what I've done to get the information, what steps we took, what records we asked for. I try to be extremely transparent and hope that that comes across.
And building on that, our track record of doing that, of being fair, of being transparent, showing what we've done and giving everyone a fair shake, I would hope that history, that record translates into that kind of a trust. We know that one misstep blows that trust. We're cognizant of that, and we do everything we can to make sure we don't make a misstep that would cause that trust to be broken.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time here, and just one last question. And it goes back to like that pejorative, which is now called fake news. And since you all have over 15 years experience individually, how do you feel about like that the president of the United States has tagged journalists as fake news, and it's now I can't think of that word, but
Your catchphrase?
well, kind of. But anyways, I mean, how does that affect you all?
Personally, it doesn't affect me at all because I know he's politicking, but I also know that it's part of the reason why we're in this dangerous situation now and why people are threatening reporters. A pipe bomb, or what was believed to be a pipe bomb at CNN in New York today, that makes you wonder. But while I know he's using a buzzword or a catchphrase, one, again, that you would expect to come from a dictator or someone in another country, and you'd never expect to hear the President of the United States say it, we know we have to keep chugging along. In the end, the truth will win. It always does.
Okay. Anything else?
And he's right to
Okay.
his opinion.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Letitia and Ian. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Ask Media Anything. We want to thank our media experts for this episode, Ian Auzenne, executive news producer for KATC TV3, and Letitia Walker, news director at KATC TV3. We hope that you have enjoyed and learned something from this conversation. Visit aocinc.org to find out about the next episode of Ask Media Anything on AOC. Until then, we encourage you to stay engaged and informed with your community.